Hello, listeners. This is the Risky Planner Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Albert, the topic today, it makes me think about my dad. You say nuclear, and then I think about my dad. He was a nuclear sub captain.
He was a captain.
He was a captain. And I've got a picture of him in my office on the top of the sail of a nuclear, U.S. ballistic missile. There's 24 intercontinental ballistic missiles, in that sub, in the picture. So,
I'm seeing in our show notes that you drove a sub. It wasn't that sub, was it?
I actually drove that sub. That's the USS Georgia.
That
actually
seems
piloted
like a problem.
Yeah, and it's so easy because back in the, I think this is like mid 80s. The sub, I don't know if the technology's changed, but if you're piloting, it's like that, steering wheel in an airplane or a Cessna, right? It's just that and you push, pull, turn, and the only things that you had to do is there's two levels. There's a flat level, and then there's an arced level, sort of 90-degree arc, and you just keep, you keep both bubbles in the middle, and the sub is not going to hit a rock. That's pretty much it. So it's like $1 trillion piece of Navy equipment, and 10-year-old Nate Habermeyer with ADHD is piloting the submarine from Long Beach to San Diego.
I think we can all be very happy that those days are long behind us now. The days of 10-year-olds driving
submarines. Exactly. Yeah. I dove in a torpedo tube as well.
Yeah, I don't. Why? Because that seems
because
gross.
It's cool, man. You're under the water. I don't know how, 600 feet or whatever. You're under the water. The torpedo tube, when it's not filled with seawater, you pressurize it before they shoot the torpedo.
Right.
And then, but it's, it's cold metal. It's very greasy. You put on a poopy suit, they called it, the one piece. I think it was called a poopy suit. And then you dove the tube. And it was I got to get a $10,000 screw out of the front. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know why they made us do that, or they asked us to, but we're like, all right, cool. And we're the captain's son. So of course we're the first ones that get thrown in the tube. I also, third story, I completed my nuclear missile launch training while I was on that sub.
This was still at the age of 10?
At the age of 10. I did not hold the keys to launch nuclear missiles, but
Thank the Lord.
I knew the process by which, once I got the key, I could insert it, turn it, and then follow the steps in the process to
important
launch a
question for you.
Yeah.
I also asked this question of Joe McBrearty, the former CEO of CNL. He and I ran into each other at a cocktail party once, and I found out that he was the captain of the USS Dallas, which famously is the nuclear attack sub that happened is a big part of the end of the Hunt for Red October.
Yeah, exactly. There's the Ohio and the Dallas. My dad was on Georgia, which is an Ohio sub. Yeah.
So I was trying to, I was there to talk to him about new business and talk about our offerings and all that stuff. But all I wanted to talk about was Hunt for Red October. So of course quizzed Joe McBrearty about that for a little while.
It's so good.
But it is so good. And he was really game for it. So shout out to you, Joe. I appreciate that. That reminds me of a movie, of course, which is Crimson Tide. So you learned the process of launching the nukes. How like Crimson Tide is it on a scale of 1 to Crimson Tide?
Pretty similar, actually. If I remember the scenes, pretty similar, right? There, so they get there's a code, Alpha Tango Bravo, blah 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 blah, and you have these code books. The captain has a key. I think the cob of the chief of the boat.
Chief of the boat. So
that's
chief
the
of the boat.
They all have keys, so they all have to turn the keys. They open up the safe. They get the launch codes, and then there's a redundancy where the launch codes are then radioed from wherever,
So it sounds like it's about a .8 Crimson Tide. At the
yeah, so it's pretty similar. And then they crack the code, they open it up, they read the code, they read the
By the way, cracking that little plastic code, like in the movie, man, that just looks so satisfying. Like I want to have little pieces of plastic with paper in them.
Yeah,
so
before you destroy like 10 million people. Yes.
Yep. No, yes. I want to do it because I want to find out what I'm having for dinner.
I'm going to end the world, but before I'm going to crack this plastic tablet. I know,
and that's going to feel so good. It's very ASMR.
But so I think it's pretty similar. They read the codes, and then they confirm. The COB confirms it and says confirmed. The captain confirms it, confirmed, and then the XO confirms. My dad was also an XO before, and then he confirms it. So there's like this whole confirmation process, and then I think the XO, the CEO, and the COB, or I don't know, they all put in like their second keys that they get out of the safe. Oh, and then by the way, the captain, when they're getting all of this stuff out of the safe, he also gets a 9mm. He gets a gun. He holsters a gun and puts it on because he's supposed to, in case of a mutiny, if he is supposed to shoot that sailor dead to stop them from stopping the launch of that missile. So
that makes sense when you start racking it up against that whole like 10 million people guaranteed to die type of thing. Like that's you definitely don't want that to happen some by accident or because some.
But there's so many redundancies in the process. There would never be an accident. There's so many redundancies, and then they turn the keys, and they all have to turn the keys at the same time, and then the launch. Then they have to push buttons at like several points. Like several places in the sub. So you couldn't actually do it yourself. You physically cannot do it yourself.
So it's a little bit like the end of Severance Season 1, which, I'm not going to spoil because I'm sure people are still catching up on Severance Season 1.
Yes, exactly. But, I haven't even, nope. So there you go. That's my claim. That's my claim to fame. All right, so let's move along, Albert, and start in the topic. We already introduced nuclear. What we're going to talk about today is innovation in nuclear power generation. That sounds really boring, but it's actually pretty exciting. And we're talking about small modular reactors, or SMRs.
Yeah, SMRs.
We're talking about the future of clean energy generation in North America, around the world. It was really hot, and then it wasn't so hot, and then like we've seen some recent announcements, people talking about SMR. Like, what is an SMR, and why is it the future? Why is it innovative?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you'd frame it up that way because, like, depending on how you see the world, we're a couple years late to talking about SMRs, right? Because they very much had a moment in the sun. A couple years back, it was every nuclear news article you were going to read, every announcement coming out of every conference. SNC-Lavalin was talking about it a lot. I guess they're Atkins-Rayleigh now, but like, their CANDU division was building a smaller version of that, and like there's just a whole bunch of different like really wild reactor designs, often based on old concepts from the Cold War. So like that really tickles my funny bone whenever somebody's like, I want to build a Cold War thing. I'm like, please do. But like there were all kinds of crazy reactor designs that were in contention, and all of them had the same two things in common. Okay, I guess you could call it three things, but let's call it two. So one is that they're small and modular, like the whole SMR thing. Like they're small meaning that they're going to top out in like the half a gigawatt range, like the 500 megawatt, whereas like a full size reactor could be 850 megawatts, a gigawatt, or more per reactor. Okay, so small modular reactors. The biggest one I'm aware of that has cleared any kind of regulatory bar is a 300 megawatt.
Why would you build a small? So that brings smaller,
me to thing
larger,
right? It's smaller because so I'll get into why they can. Make
Trump is talking about SMRs, so
which was kind of weird. but
you also know that it's like late. Like if Trump is talking about it, it's probably late. But who knows?
So I did a little homework on this. I'll tell you why he was talking about it and like why it's on his mind. Yeah, but the reason why anyway, that just brings me to thing two. Okay, thing two is that in principle, by making the modulars or by making the reactors smaller and modular, you're also reducing the cost of them, like on an individual basis, and the time to market. And like the big sticking point of like traditional large-scale nuclear reactors in the past has always been that if you want to spin one up, in order to achieve economies of scale, you need to build multiple reactor units, all of which are generating 850 kilowatts, a gigawatt more. Really huge numbers of like electrical power. Okay, huge numbers of electrical power doesn't make sense, but you get the idea.
Yep.
So and that would cost you $20 billion, $30 billion. So most nuclear projects in the past 30 years have gotten as far as the initial feasibility study phase and then died because they're too expensive, right? So SMRs are an attempt to fix that problem by bringing the scale down and making it easier for more accessible to mid-sized operators.
The dollar store, Dollar General of nuclear reactors. That's what
we're
talking about.
Yeah,
they're cheaper.
Exactly.
What does
you
it
can have
cost?
one for only $12 billion.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a drop in the bucket.
There's something that's easy to forget about any kind of nuclear reactors. I mentioned this earlier, but it's particularly true of small modular reactors. This is where the modular part comes in. So if you're dealing with a small amount of generation, you need many of them in order to make a power station that is worth anyone's time. Okay, so if you're trying to rebuild a traditional power station where your other options would have been like a gas-fired or a coal plant or something like that, like a more traditional technology, even a more traditional large-scale nuclear technology, you only need a couple of units or even just one. Like the Point Lepreau generation station in New Brunswick has one CANDU reactor, and that's their entire business, is they just run that one reactor unit. Okay, so if you're doing that, then multiple SMRs would be required to make up that same amount of generation capacity. So you have to build, instead of building one reactor core like in Point Lepreau, you'd be building 3 or 4 to make
that's
up the
all
same
you need.
amount of.
Okay, so it's not like I'm building 300 of them.
Well, this actually gets me to part of the reason why there's something that Trump has on his mind when he's campaigning, because when he was president, his Department of Energy actually approved the installation of a small modular reactor complex at the Idaho National Laboratory. This happened back in 2019. So that was going to be 12 new-scale SMR modules. 12. Okay.
12.
So
how big are we talking? What's the footprint of one of those?
So the smallest ones, and bear in mind, precisely 0 of these things have been actually built yet, outside of any kind of.
Because I've been thinking about getting one of those battery, those home battery units. If I get an SMR, I can
Tesla
go completely off grid. And
you could, you and several thousand. Of
I've
your
got
$12
million sitting around.
Yeah,
it's true.
It's true. I mean, if you have $12 billion sitting around, then we're having a conversation after we record, because we've got some things to do.
I was lying.
Oh, that's too bad. Too bad for me mostly.
Yeah.
But no, two things about that project. How big are they? You ask me. How big are they? And the answer is pretty big. Okay, the very smallest ones would fit on the back of a truck. Okay.
Nice.
So, and that's just be the core itself. And when I say a truck, I'm not talking about your buddy's F-150. I'm talking about a 40-foot, 18-wheeler. Okay. So a pretty. These are. And those are the small ones, man.
Okay. So,
to give you an idea of the scale, the smallest nuclear SMR technologies I'm aware of were kind of colloquially referred to at the time as nuclear batteries. Okay, you've probably heard this used for lots of different things.
Yep.
So nuclear batteries, usually it means that it's some kind of waste burner, or it just uses the radiation from a decaying nuclear particle to produce it's often known as RTG, a radiothermal generator. That's one form of a nuclear battery. But those were pitched at the back in the couple years ago heyday of SMR conversations. Those were pitched as potential replacements for seagoing cargo vessels. They could use that instead of their steam plant or their boiler plants.
Yes.
To drive screws and that sort of thing. So that's the size we're talking about. Okay, they'd be the size of the diesel plant on a cargo vessel, on a Panamax cargo vessel. So that's still pretty big. Okay, and then they go up from there. The GE Hitachi BWRX 300, which is one of the designs that gets an awful lot of attention.
Sounds like a really cool motorcycle.
It does. Yeah, exactly. It does 250 horsepower and goes 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. But no, it's 2 stories tall. Okay?
Yeah.
So, these things are not small, actually. They're only small compared to their larger counterparts.
But they're small in money. They're a lot cheaper. Cheaper, quote unquote. I'm using my fingers.
Yes.
Yep.
And air quotes are important here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because, to get back to what Trump said, you mentioned that he'd been talking about them. He didn't actually use SMRs by name, to my knowledge, but he did say, he was very clearly hinting at them. What he said was, and I quote, "Starting on day one, I will approve new drilling, new pipelines, new refineries, new power plants, new reactors, and we will slash the red tape. We will get the job done," close quotes. So he said that in Potterville, Michigan last week. Now, may not be last week by the time this comes out, but it doesn't matter. The point is that he's clearly referring back to this NuScale plant, but here's the problem with the NuScale plant and the one it's not really NuScale's plant, it's Idaho National Laboratory. Okay, that plant got canceled. Okay, reason cited was low subscription numbers. So basically, they weren't confident they could make their money back. Okay. So there is absolutely a low cost to entry compared to a traditional nuclear reactor, but it's not that low. And people are just now starting to do the math and figure out how expensive they're going to be. And the answer is pretty darned expensive. Okay?
Yeah.
So,
it's pretty darn expensive. So, he mentioned nuclear. Like, are people scared? There's the whole, like, you remember, this is like going back 10, 15 years. So the whole meltdown, the whole meltdown, the tsunami, like the Germany, right? Didn't they get rid of all their nuclear power plants?
Yeah.
Or France, right? They just cleaned house, right? And so now all of a sudden, are we having like this nuclear renaissance or something like that? Like, are people afraid? Are these SMRs safer? Or am I just like being crazy?
You're not being crazy. There is definitely a nuclear renaissance of sorts. And by the way, you were correct about Germany. In fact, they've already completed phasing out their nuclear program. Like they closed the last ones last year. But there are new demands for nuclear type energy in order to meet green energy targets. Like in Canada, we have very aggressive 2030 targets.
Yep.
That actually start to kick in next year in 2025. So back a few years ago, when people were really hot to trot about SMRs, they were talking about having things stood up in like proving plants and prototype plants by next year, and then having full-scale power production facilities ready by 2030. And that is the absolute earliest it could possibly happen based on the way things have trended in the last couple of years, is 2030.
And speaking of 2030 or 2029 and just Canada in general, so recent news was our friends out in Saskatchewan, SaskPower, just announced that they have created a new corporate entity called SaskNuclear to really like to see this through, and potentially they would be online in 2029. Is the potentially, but I don't like, so it's really exciting for Saskatchewan, who is joining the whole like Canadian nuclear landscape, SaskPower, to have launched this new corporate entity. Because OPG, Ontario Power Generation, was talking about SMRs. They're getting close, right? They've already broken ground in some of their SMR stuff.
They have, yeah. And there's
I think that was in the news a while ago.
US.
Yeah, but the most recent one is SaskNuclear, and that's pretty exciting.
And they've been talking about nuclearizing their power grid for a little while. I'm not sure if nuclearizing is a word, but it sure sounds like
it is now.
There you
hear
go.
That?
Nuclearize,
Webster, Merriam-Webster.
Nuclearizing,
word of the year.
So nuclearizing their grid has been a priority of theirs since at least that first kind of bump of SMR popularity a couple years ago. I've been talking to people at SaskPower off and on kind of casually about this for a couple of years now. And Saskatchewan and Alberta, if we're talking about provinces in Canada, they have something in common. It's not necessarily a feather in their cap. They have very low percentage of power generation from renewables. So they actually have the largest hill to climb when it comes to meeting those 2030 targets. Alberta benefits from having a lot of oil money in the province, which gives them some ways to nuclearize that are a little bit more lower hanging fruit, because a lot of the power that's consumed in northern Alberta in particular is done so like at the oil patch, like on the oil sands. So a lot of that is cogen. right? Or it's
what is
it's
what
grid
do you
scale.
mean cogen?
Cogen is cogeneration. It's where in addition to whatever business you're doing at your remote job site, you're also generating electricity. Generally to do off takes, like meaning you can take things off the grid, so you could just put some of that power into production right in your very home plant, or it serves as backup power or something like that.
This is like oil sands type of
oil sands
operations.
have there's some cogen up there. I don't know how much, to be honest, but it's pretty common at larger oil and gas facilities, especially the more remote ones or the ones that are in flea speck towns that don't have some giant
they're not connecting to the grid in any way. They're
they absolutely are connected to the grid. They have more in common with somebody who sticks solar panels on their roof than they do with somebody who's trying to truly live off the grid, but the point is that the cogen itself may or may not be on the grid, but the facilities generally are. But the point is that, like, if right now, first off, do you know how to make power? Like, if you and I wanted to start a power plant tomorrow, do you know how we would do that? Like, what are the steps?
I'm sure that there's a plan on the dark web somewhere, but why don't you tell me? Because I do not know.
Okay, so
I have a stationary bike that I could connect to something.
Yeah, a million.
I went to the science center. I don't know. Yeah, how do you create it?
So if you're not going to go with the million hamsters route, then generally speaking, the way humans have chosen to generate electrical power for themselves is by generating steam and then using that steam to push turbines. Okay. Now, there are variations on this theme. Like hydropower is a good example of this, where they're just using water directly, usually from a natural water source to just...
Yeah, like a dam or like water turbines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And tidal is another example.
Yeah.
Because tidal power is coming into its own pretty soon. But generally speaking, if you're doing it onshore, then you're making steam, you're turning a thing, and that thing makes electricity.
Doing it onshore. You mean like
meaning
doing
like
it here?
Not on a body of water.
Got it. Okay.
Or near one. So if you are doing, you can make steam however you like. Okay. So the easiest way to do it is to burn something and make water hot. So like that's where coal plants come in, and like natural gas plants, and even like trash burning plants that generate electricity. They're just lighting stuff on fire. Okay. Which is fun, but not particularly efficient.
Interesting. So I think you've revealed a little bit too much about yourself, Albert.
Well, look, am I going to go light garbage on fire later?
Prodigy was my favorite band.
Yeah, who cannot claim to have
Firestarter was
Prodigy
awesome.
Back in the 90s.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Anyway, so on the most extremely technologically advanced end of that make steam turn a thing style is like a fusion reactor, okay, which those are coming into their own soon as well. So it's just like, how do you make the water hot? Are you doing it in a sciencey way that's really interesting and fun, or are you doing it in a boring light something on fire type of way? Nuclear reactors are obviously doing it in one of the most sciencey ways that they can. Okay, like their whole job in life is to generate heat in a sustained, controllable manner. That's all they have to do. But at the end of the day, it boils down to making steam and pushing it through some place at pressure. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to do that, and that's part of the reason why there are so many different SMR reactor designs that are all being considered. But this brings me to one of the challenges with implementing SMRs, which is that there's very few of them actually approved for use. Okay, like reference designs need to be approved by regulators before they can ever be put into production. And that's only happened for a small handful of
and we're not even talking about after the community sort of a consultation type of process.
Yeah,
that
that's right.
Governments host, and
you got it. Yeah, we're just
I think
talking
Saskatchewan
about...
has that stuff coming up, and OPG did theirs, and that's very time consuming.
It is, and the actual approval usually falls with the nuclear proponents or the people who have come up with the technology. So I mentioned GE Hitachi's BWRX 300 earlier. That's one of the ones that has cleared regulatory bars in the U.S. and I believe definitely in Canada. I think in the U.S. Because it's a miniaturized version of an existing reactor design. So they were able to get that one across pretty fast. NuScale also cleared. This is the reason why it was chosen in 2019 for the Idaho National Laboratory Generation Station, because it has cleared the regulatory bar of having its reference design approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Okay, so like it's ready to rock and roll once they can make the numbers work. And that brings me to the second challenge, which I referenced earlier. They're just not costing as little or taking as little time to produce as people thought they would. Okay. And by the way, you might have the very reasonable question of like, we haven't actually tried to build one. How do we know that they're going to be crazy?
Yeah, I was going to say, if they haven't been done. Yeah. Okay. So are we confident?
Oh, well, look, this is going to be a running theme through all of these shows that we do together, Nate, but no one should ever be confident about their numbers before the shovels hit the dirt, you know.
Yes.
No one should ever think that they know things that they don't know. I mean, the future is a foreign country the same way the past is, you know. So, good luck trying to predict the future.
I like the philosophical. Yeah, we'll do a whole like episode on philosophy.
Yeah.
No, but I hear
People
you.
are going to love that.
Yeah. About Time. Good book.
Indeed. But no, that estimating is hard. Okay, like cost estimation is really, really hard. Schedule estimation even harder. So it's tough, especially when you're dealing with something that's a first of its kind, which any SMR that gets built, you know, starting now is going to be a first of its kind. Okay.
So what are the other? So that's a huge. Okay, so you're going to be the first. It's going to be the first of its kind. Does that mean that like every time we build an SMR? I mean, is it just are we just going back to the drawing board? Or is there like that's a pretty big drawback?
It is, and I wouldn't say that we're going back to the drawing board necessarily, because you know any power plant, like I said, you know, you're basically making steam, you're pushing it through a turbine, so that the steam and the turbine, those are basically common features of any power plant, you know, of any technological complexity that I was describing earlier. They all have that. So there is some certainty around what they call the non-nuclear island, like what that's going to cost and how it's going to look. Like the scope of that is not difficult to estimate necessarily. But the nuclear island stuff is all going to be new and novel. And you know, I referenced earlier that there's the natrium plant.
Yeah,
the TerraPower plant.
TerraPower.
So
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates is So they've broken.
That was back in
ground
June or July, maybe. Yeah, June, I think. Right? They broke ground.
Yeah,
broke
What they broke ground.
Yeah.
What they broke ground on was the non-nuclear island, though. It was the power generation stuff, because the rest of it hasn't been approved yet. So they're running into, or they're potentially going to run into the same schedule protraction that some of the other nuclear proponents have, which is that you're throwing a lot of new information at these regulators and expecting them to get, you know, clearances done and safety assessments made and that kind of thing.
What are the downsides to that? Well, okay, so I guess the regulators, the process of approval, biggest sort of hurdle. What other kind of hurdles are we talking about? Like, are these things designed? Are we like what hurdles are we dealing with to get these things going?
Well, there's definitely reference to, so this gets to the modular part of small modular reactors. Like in principle, those reference designs should be mass producible. So you know, NuScale or GE Hitachi or Moltex or ARC or whomever is just going to be able to kind of crank out reactor cores in a factory.
Fusioneering is,
so Kyoto Fusioneering is it is different, because they're more on the fuels side of things, as I understand it.
Yep.
Like they're using tritium to generate fusion fuel. Like that's their eventual plan. They announced a partnership with CNL not too long ago to do exactly that.
CNL, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, for our listeners.
Who invented the CANDU reactor, by the way. So like all those, a big chunk of the nuclear power generation in, say, India and all of it in Canada is all done using CANDU reactors that were invented at the Chalk River Laboratories. That's what CNL operates. And so they are working, and CANDU reactor produce a lot of tritiated water, so it's great for producing fusion fuel.
Yeah.
But that's a bit off the SMR topic, because all of the SMRs that I'm aware of are either based on nuclear decay or fission. Okay. So, you know, that's a different suite of nuclear chemistry.
I used to ask my dad questions about the sub, and he'd be like, I can tell you, but I have to kill you.
Yeah. No, he was probably.
How does your reactor work? I can tell you, but I have to kill you. Did you chase Russian subs? I can tell you, but I have to kill you. It was just
probably
this
could have told you more
constant
than he
refrain.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How deep did you go? Well, no, this is great. Okay. I wanna end this conversation with
I bet you do. Yeah.
A piece of advice. Yeah. I want to talk to SaskNuclear. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, well, not hypothetically, is like SaskNuclear said they're going to deploy their SMRs, maybe 2029, maybe 2030. What advice would you give them to sort of set themselves up for success to meet that deadline?
So there's a lot of smart people working on this over there. I know a tiny handful of them, and I'm sure that they're already switched on when it comes to this. But what advice I would give them is to learn from recent history. Okay, so there is a reason why there are new refurbishments planned at large-scale nuclear reactors, because that may actually be more time and cost-effective than trying to go down the road of building something new and novel, a first of its kind, to make energy happen by 2030. Leaning on existing technologies might actually be the best way to go. Okay, now that doesn't mean that they shouldn't try. There are reference designs that are approved, and so I would, if I were them, be looking really carefully at the NuScale design that was approved in the U.S., at TerraPower/Natrium's design that's undergoing approval, at ARC, Moltex, that are in the late stages of approval due to partnerships with provincial authorities here, and of course the GE Hitachi unit that has already been approved. So they're going to be prioritizing things that have a shorter approval cycle, which is good, but their cost to go to market is going to have to be real low too. Okay.
What do you mean by
so
cost to go to market?
Meaning
what
like
that?
So they have to recuperate all their costs from like sales of electricity to customers, okay? And that's their subscriber numbers. So they need to keep costs nice and low so that those costs to subscribers aren't super duper high. That, by the way, is what killed the Idaho National Laboratory NuScale deployment, okay? So that was canceled, and the reason why they said that they couldn't build the subscriber base that they would need to eventually pay back the plant, right? And that's with the small modular system. Okay, so my advice to Sask Power and anyone else who's looking to build new nuclear in these our modern times, pay attention to recent history. There are lessons to be learned there. So I don't know if that's too cryptic, but it makes sense to me. What do you
Excellent.
think, Nate?
No, I love it. All right, thanks, Albert.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. It's a good conversation.
Yeah, this is fun. We'll do it again next week.
Indeed.
All right, later. Thanks for tuning in to the Risky Planner podcast. We hope today's conversation was informative and above all else inspires you to excellence in what you do. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, leave us a review. It helps us reach more listeners. I'd also like to thank my friend Thompson Igbo for the music. If you liked the music on all of our episodes, check out Thompson's work at egbomusic.com. That's EGBO music.com. Talk to you later.